Okay, good morning, everyone. We're on to the home straight of the course. It's been a long semester. I realize it's particularly first year. You're not used to the intensity of the study, and I don't apologize for it, but I do acknowledge it. I don't apologize for it because the purpose of the education is to build intellectual muscles, and you don't build them without exercising them. And first year seems impossibly difficult in some ways, the workload and so forth, and then it doubles in second year. But you find second year is easier than first year in spite of that, because now you're actually used to exercising the muscles that you're going to be using, believe it or not. And you will be honing your minds and your spirits, because along with that you have to develop, there's a character element to it, without a doubt. And what you're really doing is learning to be the people of the book. I wanted to say that at the outset. I'm speaking in tomorrow's chapel on Bible reading as opposed to looking at cell phones. That was the topic I was given. And it just gave me pause to reflect on what we're doing here. But that phrase, the people of the book, is what Muslims used in the medieval period to call Christians. They were called the people of the book. By the way, can you put the cell phones away, please? Just as a apropos. The people of the book, because they recognized that the identity of Christians was absolutely bound up in their view of the special nature of the Bible and what it did to the people who read it. That was a part of, even before the Reformation. I say that because we're now into the Reformation. We just left off with Everyman on the cusp of the Reformation, a medieval mystery play. And now we're going to look at John Donne, a metaphysical poet, born to Roman Catholic parents in 1572. So that's after the Reformation. Luther's nailing the 95 Thesis to the door in Wittenberg is, 50 years earlier, and so forth. So the Reformation has already happened when Donne is born, and so has the transformation of England, because the Bible has been translated by William Tyndale, among others, into the English language. And it had a profound effect on English culture. Because now people could read for the first time the Bible in their own language. It wasn't only the highly educated that were privy to the secrets of God's counsels. It was the common people. They could read it in their own language, or they could hear sermons preached from an English text. It's a profound effect, and I say that because in our day there has been an assault on the Bible, even amongst Christians, or a negligence of the Bible and the Word and the importance of a literary culture. A Christian culture is being severed from words. Donne was living in a very different age. I'll say more about that tomorrow in the chapel service, because I think it's a vital theme. Because if Christians are and have always been called the people of the book, and you sever yourselves from that identity, what are you? What is your identity? We've seen in way back in the Odyssey that Odysseus was trying to come back home to recover his identity. He was on an island with a nymph, Calypso, covering up who he was. Nobody knew who he was. He had lost his identity in the process. He's with a nymph of eternal beauty. Her beauty would never fade, but he wanted to go home to be with his wife and his son, in part because that's part of who he was. It was recovering his identity. So to have a people of the book without a book to which they cleave and understand themselves in the relation to the Word of God. Remember, Jesus is the Word of God. That's what he's called in John 1, is to have an identity crisis. People with a severe identity crisis are amnesiacs. They don't know who they are. They've lost their memory. It seems to me that a lot of what is happening in our world is that very thing. It's actually a cultural attempt to remove a historic identity, and a identity connected in particular with the word, and actually in an interesting way in the form of an image. Very much image-based. So and I'll use this, talk about this tomorrow. People have cell phones on which they have these little icons, and you click on the icon then opens up the program and so forth. The Bible says that we are the icons of God. We're made in the image of God. One of the words there is icon, made in the image and likeness of God. So these are profound issues. Is that image of God related to the Word of God, or is it related to technology? Is it something that's malleable, infinitely flexible? Can it adapt infinitely to any possibility? Those are the issues here. But Donne is writing in the light of the Reformation, when Martin Luther and others insisted that he was going to understand God on the basis of the Word, and he was going to place himself under the authority of the Word of God. So it's a profound shift culturally. It's not a shift per se. It's a re-centering of what the identity of the church had always been. Because of course, as I say in John 1, Jesus says, or John says, that Jesus was the Word made flesh, who dwelt amongst us. So when Donne is born, he's born to Catholic parents. And just a little political context here. By this point, there is only one established church in England. It's not the Catholic Church anymore, it's the Anglican. What that means is that if you're a Catholic, which up until 50 years before that, everyone in England who was a Christian would have been, you are now, you've lost your identity to some degree, insofar as you're not part of the official Church of England. The Church of England is the establishment church, and the head of that church is the King of England, or the Queen, whoever the monarch is, following Henry VIII. In Donne's day, it would be Elizabeth I, the great Elizabeth I, much celebrated in popular culture in our day. And her identity was very much related to her reading of the Bible. She was a great scholar herself, actually, and highly literate, would have read all the texts that you've read on this course, in addition to the Bible. Would have understood the importance of words in forming her identity. At any rate, Donne writes in the light of this, born to Catholic parents, but he himself is, by the time he writes, not a Catholic. He has a conversion experience. And eventually he becomes the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. And I'll put this up on the screen here. It just occurred to me. I'll put this up because it exists to this very day. It's one of the landmarks of London. Sorry, the typewriter doesn't work very well here. So this unblank? Yeah. Could you turn that light off there just so I can show you? So this is it from one side. It's more famous from across the bridge, the Millennium Bridge, if I can find this. There you go. See if I'll put that up on the big screen here. Ah, that's not bad. Can you see it? This is called the Millennium Bridge. It was built in 2000. It's just a little mini bridge, and it goes across, and St. Paul's looms over the side, the horizon. In European cities, there's basically an understanding, in order to preserve the historic culture, they don't allow skyscrapers to grow up and make them larger than these landmarks. These are iconic landmarks, parts of the city's identity. Today we build up in Toronto, and densification, and there's some rationale for it, and they're hideous, and they prevent you from seeing the lake, which is one of the main features, and the island, one of the features of Toronto. You can drive and you never know the lake was there because of all the condos that have been built up. But here it's a landmark, St. Paul's. Now, he was the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral and one of the famous preachers of his day. But he was also, in addition to this, he was a famous poet. And the type of poetry that he wrote was called metaphysical poetry. Now, let me say a little bit about that, because the word metaphysical in philosophy has certain connotations. There's physics and there's metaphysics. Physics is an observation of the natural world and what you see in it. Metaphysics is the realm that you can't see, but which is necessary in order for the physical world to make sense. Rationally, logically. So it will largely be in the realm of mathematics and so forth, what we now call physics, somewhat confusingly. Because physics in Aristotle's day, in the Greek day, would refer to the visible world, whereas physics in our day refers to things that you can't see. It's the background, not the hardware, although it's more the software, the operating system. That's the physics, the stuff you can't see that makes things work. That's what physics is. But historically, it was the other way around. Physics is what you observe, and metaphysics is what makes it work that way. But when Donne writes metaphysical poetry, he's not doing quite that. He is using, he's called a metaphysical poet because he combines unlikely things together in his poetry, characteristically, things that contradict one another, like physics and metaphysics to some degree. And we're going to go through a wide variety, with 3 poems today. I'd like to do more, but we have a short space of time. We'll do 3 holy sonnets next time. And one of the things that you're going to find shocking about Mr. Donne is, although he's the famous clergyman, the most famous preacher of his day, arguably, much of his poetry is related to erotic love, and seems quite scandalous, in fact. And the first poem we're going to look at, The Flea, is a great illustration of that. But it's a metaphysical poem. And one of my teachers back when I was an undergraduate said, just to help you understand here, whenever Donne appears to be writing about sex, he's writing about the love of God. And whenever he's writing about the love of God, he's actually writing about sex. And he holds those two together because, again, one of the metaphors of God's relationship to his people is that of a bridegroom to a bride. It's an erotic relationship of sorts. I mean, it can be misunderstood if you push it far too far, but that imagery is very clear in Scripture. Ephesians 5, verses 21 to 33. At the end of the book of Revelation, we see God in the new heavens and the new earth. God is coming down. Rather, the heavenly Jerusalem is coming down dressed like a bride, and God is the bridegroom. So this is his people, and he relates to this heavenly Jerusalem, which is actually the church, and he loves the church as his own spouse. That's what Ephesians 5 says. But that language of bride and bridegroom is throughout Scripture. And Donne uses that in his poetry extensively. Now, he's building on something we've already seen, the courtly love tradition. So that lies in the background. All the way back, we first saw it in Dante, right? And it was a problem. There are problems with the courtly love tradition from a Christian perspective. It's immoral. But the conventions of the courtly love tradition don't go away. And they're played with by poets in this period. Shakespeare also will play with these same conventions in his sonnets, and actually in his drama, for that matter. So the idea that a woman of superior social rank is somebody that you ought to worship as a goddess, those are courtly love conventions. To this very day, love songs speak about the superiority of the woman to the man. I'm not worthy. And your eyes are like diamonds, your lips like rubies, whatever it's at, certain stock phrases. Those owe themselves to this period. Now, Donne is playing with all those conventions when he comes upon it, but he now gives them a theological turn, and it's far more explicitly so. But let me come to the first poem here that I want to use to illustrate that, if I can, Where is it? There it is. This one's called The Flea. I'm going to read it first of all. Oh, it's behind me here and I can't move it. That's frustrating. Anyway, I gave you the text. You should have it in your booklets, but I'll stick it behind me. I don't know if you can read it. I'll put it up further so maybe you can, but unfortunately this version is not very helpful because it's got this big title at the top. I wonder if I can find a different version here. 2 seconds. Donne, The Flea. We'll not use that one. Don't use these internet sources if you're writing essays on this. Some of them might be okay. Most of them are not. And in any case, it's... No, I can't even find it. There must be other versions here. Anyway, I'm just going to read what I have. So it begins with the tone of a preacher. In preaching in Donne's day, they would use the rhetorical tradition of an exemplum, an example. You point to something as an illustration of something else. So this is my illustration. To this day, preachers do this as well. So they'll start a sermon often with a little picture or an image, and then they're going to, that just leads you into the topic, and then they're going to build upon it in relation to the text, right? So I'll do it tomorrow. But it's stock standard, and so this is when he says, "Mark but this flea, and mark in this how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee. And in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Thou knowest that this cannot be said as sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead. Yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swells with one blood made of two. And this, alas, is more than we would do." I'll read the whole poem. It's only 3 stanzas. "Oh, stay," stop. "3 lives in one flea spare, where we almost, nay, more than married are. This flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed, and marriage temple is. Though parents grudge, and you, we are met and cloistered in these living walls of jet. Though use makes you apt to kill me, let not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege, 3 sins in killing 3. Pause. And then she punishes the flea. "Cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence. Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphst, and sayest that thou find'st not thyself, nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true. Then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor, when thou yieldst to me, will waste as this flea's death took life from thee." This is by the Dean of St. Paul's. I mean, it's scandalous stuff. I will also say to you that when Donne wrote this, he didn't publish it. He probably distributed it to his friends. Poetry was an exercise of amusement. People took delight in writing and reading poetry. He would have distributed it among his friends. We're using the courtly love traditions, but we obviously have a theological turn on it because we take theology seriously, but we're sort of mixing the two here. Let me go through it in greater detail here, just for a second. I will try and make it larger. That didn't help. No, I don't have enough control over this. Oh. 2 sec there. So the flea, you need certain ideas in your head here also. Donne is going to use here a favored form of comparison that is very common. As I say, it's a metaphysical conceit. First of all, the flea represents something else more important. It's just a little flea. But he compares it to all manner of things. It represents the two of them. It's like there's a union of the two of them in the blood of the flea, and the blood represents the life of them. It's the union of two in a sort of a marriage within the body of the flea. So it represents two of them. It represents a bride and a bridegroom. It goes to the end, it represents Christ. So this is a metaphysical conceit. Conceit is just not because Donne is conceited, it's the word in the day that refers to a concept. But that's the technical term. A metaphysical conceit is the term that literary scholars use to describe this. It's an idea, and it's welding together or fusing together two ideas that just don't work. I mean, it's a ridiculous comparison. It is ridiculous. He knows it's ridiculous, by the way. It's purposefully humorous. But he's using the conventions of the courtly love tradition, and of course, in the courtly love tradition, there is always scandal. There's adultery and so forth. There is a sort of adultery. What's the scene? He imagines himself wooing a woman, right? In the courtly love tradition, he has to pronounce himself her slave. I will love you till my dying days. Nothing will separate us. I'll never stop loving you, etc., etc. And only then she will give in, even though it's an adulterous affair. Okay, so there's a scandal attached to it already. And the way it presents itself, he is wooing her at this point. She's saying, forget it. No chance. Not getting anywhere. And so then he comes to the example. The flea just bit you. And it bit me before. So the blood that's in the flea represents the union that I'm proposing that you're denying me. It's already happened. It's too late. You're done. It also reflects the understanding of biology in the day. They don't understand exactly modern biology with its the microscope and so forth. There's a sense of when in Scripture when it says the two become flesh, and there's a suggestion of blood having the connotations of life. So the blood of Abel rather cries out from the ground. The life of Abel is crying out. Like blood doesn't scream. It's a metaphor, right? No? I've never heard blood screaming at any rate. But it's a metaphor for that person's life. The slain Abel is crying out to God from the ground. And here it connotes the two of them in the body of this disgusting little black flea. You ever been bitten by a flea? Awful. They have hard bodies. The only way you can kill them, if you grab them in your fingers and you squeeze them, you go, that's the end of it. You let go, boing, off they go. You got to take your nails and kill it that way. Yeah, it's something hard. You can throw them in water as well, and then they just sit there. I prefer to do that because then I feel like it's torturing them, and I like that. But they don't die that way. They just sort of sit there in the water until they probably starve, so that's okay as well. After you've been bitten by them, anyway. It brings to mind when I was sorry, stupid anecdotes, but I was looking after a professor's cats in his house while he was away, and I went away to the Lake District for the weekend with a friend over from Germany, and we came back, and the cat had fleas. I didn't know it had fleas. And the cat went out all the time, and I guess the fleas were left in the room, and the cat didn't come in because he was out hunting, whatever. He didn't like the cat food. He wanted to be out hunting, so he was. So we came in after 2 days away, and we see these fleas hopping towards us. You can almost hear them, yay, and tunk, 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 and on your legs. You got about 20 fleas. It was, anyway, that's when I decided I hated fleas and wanted to torture them. Anyway, unnecessary for me to add that. I just, whenever I think of horrid fleas. But when he's thinking of this, is thinking of this horrible creature that sucks blood. But he is comparing that blood-sucking little beastie with our two bloods mingled, as in the sexual intercourse, which happens in the confines of marriage. And in fact, he says, and the fact that you say, and in fact, that there's no shame and there's no loss of of your maidenhead, your virginity, there's nothing there. Well, then there's nothing to what we're proposing either. So he's diminishing. Now he's making a specious argument. It's a false argument. He knows Donne is not a bad logician. He understands this is a terrible argument. It's funny. It's purposefully funny. And it's conflating categories and confusing them and bringing them all in. But that's the point here. That flea which has bit you and has now bit me, or the other way around, this one even enjoys before it. It doesn't even do what I'm doing. I'm wooing you, and this one just goes right to it. He just bites you, and that's the end of it. And it swells with one blood made of two, so it's pregnant. Like the flea's body gets thick, and this, alas, is more than we would do. If you want a Canadian illustration, it's like a mosquito. So that's the opening gambit, those lines. Now note with this as well, it's written in rhyming couplets until the third and final passage where there are 3 lines that are rhyming. I'll deal with poetic, it's a lyric poem. We'll deal with that when we come to practical criticism, the various features of how Donne in his poetry has a very orderly universe, and it's represented in the poetry. But just simply note that here it has rhyming couplets: this and is, thee and be, said and had, and woo to do. You have to imagine a pause here. So he says this to her, and she's probably disgusted and irritated, and now she threatens to kill the thing. Okay, you're going to make a big deal of this? I'm going to kill you and me. And he says, oh, stay, stop. 3 lives and 1 flea spare. What are the 3 lives? His life, her life, and the baby, the little baby. There are 3. Oh, no, maybe it's the flea. You could say the flea's life. Well, who cares about that? But there are 3 of us in this, and we are almost, nay, more than married are. So earlier on, the metaphor was of marriage. Now he goes beyond that in a ridiculous argument. That the flea is you and I, and this is our marriage bed. Marriage bed where the marital relationship is consummated. This is the bed, this little black-bodied, horrible beastie. And our marriage temple is. The bride of Christ is also the temple of God, right? The people, we're living stones built into the body. So he's using the metaphor of the temple, which is again a biblical image all over the place, right? The temple where God is worshipped in the Old Testament, when Jesus pitched his tent and dwelt amongst us, that word there is a reference to the tabernacle, where God's presence dwelt. And this is so it's our marriage bed and it's our marriage temple. So it's escalated. It's not just them. It's the place of their love, and it's the place of their worship. Even though parents begrudge us and you, we are already met, and furthermore, we're cloistered in these living walls of jet. Now it's even more than that. This is where nuns and priests go and live celibate lives. So he just keeps changing. He's mixing his metaphors. And then he insults her. Though use make you apt to kill me. I'll skip over the play, but in Renaissance slang, to kill is to have sexual intercourse. There's a sense of that, again, based on biology, that your life is somehow ebbing away through the act, so forth. That's in the background here, but I'll take the whole class if I spend too much time looking at this one poem. But he says, let not to that self-murder added be, because of course this will be suicide. It's bad enough that you're willing to kill me, because probably you're the seed of Adam, and Adam's first son murdered his second. But at any rate, let not to that self-murder and sacrilege. So murder, suicide, and sacrilege, 3 sins in killing the 3 lives. So he's making an appeal. Don't do this. This is a grievous sin. This is a monumental sin. By the 3rd stanza, she's now said, You're annoying the heck out of me. This is done. Kills it. Cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence. The word purple here is in many languages, in Greek at any rate, purple and scarlet are the same word. It seems like in Greek there's it's hard to distinguish the two. In some passages in Scripture, Jesus is clad in scarlet, and others he's clad in a purple cloak. In the translations, because, but certainly purple is the garb of royalty, right? To this day, we associate kings with the color purple, and it's purple thy nail, and that's the nail on her finger, of course, that's killed it. But it has other connotations for anyone who's thinking in terms of symbols and in metaphor. It refers to a different death. It's the death of the man who wore purple, the King of Kings, and he was nailed to the cross. And the blood of innocence, which he's attributing to the flea, was actually the blood of Christ. Right? So now he's, as I say, he's gone from all of these earlier metaphors to now suggesting that by killing the flea, she's killed the Lord. Which is a blasphemous claim, of course, if he means it seriously. He doesn't mean it seriously. By the way, innocence. In this period, Donne, even though he's writing in English, he reads Latin and Greek, and the whole Reformation is written in Latin, by the way. Calvin, Luther, they're all writing in Latin. It's still the language of the church. At Wesley's day as well, by the way, he reads Latin. He learned it, and so it's the whole Christian tradition. But the word nocera here, which lies behind innocence, means to harm. It's the Latin word for to harm. So somebody who's innocent is harmless. Doesn't mean sinless, although it often gets attributed that implication as well. But literally it means the harmless, the blood of innocence. And now he asks her the question, wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which it sucked from thee? So having inflated, just like the flea's body did with their blood, all of the ridiculous connotations that he attributes to the biting of her and him, it's their marriage, it's their union of their two bodies, it's their marriage bed, it's the marriage temple, it's Christ. Now he deflates all of it and puts it back, well, it's just a flea. All he did was he took a bite from you. How dare it? Why would you kill it? Wherein could this flea guilty be except in that drop which it sucked from thee? So she follows his logic, and then he overturns his own argument. Yet thou triumphs, and you say that thou finds not thyself nor me the weaker now. So the blood that was in it, and it allegedly represented her life in the taking of his life, she doesn't feel any weakness. I killed it. I feel happy just like me. I killed that horrible little flea. So I'm not weaker. And then he find the sting in the tail. 'Tis true. Then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor when thou yields to me. A little presumptuous. This is going to happen. Of course you will, because I'm so wonderful. Will waste as this flea's death took life from me. So having inflated the significance of the flea to metaphysical proportions, to divine proportions, he then deflates it all back to this is just a little flea. And therefore concludes his argument, then we may as well do what I proposed at the outset. Consummate our love, right here. There you go. That's it. That's how he concludes it. Now, as I say, this is not a serious poem. He's also, it occurs to me, I need to say this, it's written, the whole thing is a metaphysical conceit. It's an extended metaphor of unlikely things. But it also is rooted in a certain idea that is there in what their understanding of biology and chemistry and physics is, namely that all things are composed of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And the composition of these things and the proportions of them will explain the differences between all things. So there are 4 basic elements. And so along those lines, they will use an analogy, regularly employ it. We saw Plato did this back in the Republic as well. It's the analogy between the microcosm and the macrocosm. This will become more important in a second. In the next poem, you'll see why. But the microcosm, literally, it means a little cosmos, a little world order. And a macrocosm means a great or a big world order. But the idea is that everything relates to everything else. So when Plato in his Republic, when he's talking about the Republic, but really he's talking about what justice is for an individual, and he thinks that justice for the individual will be exactly the same as it would be for the state, because the microcosm has a direct correlation to that of the state, or the Republic, or the polis, to use the more literal term. And so for Plato, justice is justice. There's no such thing as social justice, or rather social justice is justice. What it is for the individual is also what it will be for everyone, because there is no difference on the level of justice. It's a term that is not different in different contexts. It looks a little different, but it has the same basic principle. Otherwise, it couldn't be true. It would be a relative term, right? But Donne uses that here. The flea is a microcosm of the theological order of all things and the way the whole world works. So it combines all things. He uses that over and over, and it comes to a particular crystallization in this period, I would say, this use of microcosm and macrocosm. And what they're trying to do is to hold all things together in a way that reflects the great movement from the classical period to the Christian period, and to some degree to the onset of modern science. And I'm going to get to that right now, because that is the other element that differs between the medieval period and the modern period. It's not just the Reformation happens, Martin Luther. It's that modern science comes in, and a new philosophy written by an author who are you doing first year philosophy? Some of you? Have you done Descartes yet? You heard of him? You've done Descartes. Okay, good. So you will know, but not everyone is even doing it. So I'm going to just give you a very, very short introduction here. René Descartes, writing before Donne, around the same time, roughly, is generally conceived as the father of modern philosophy. My take on Descartes is responding to a new view of the cosmos. By a cosmos, in this case, I mean astronomy. There's a new astronomy. The old astronomy is this one here, if I can find it. There it is. It's a geocentric cosmology in which the Earth is at the center of the universe, and around it revolve the other planets. So the Lunae, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and in concentric circles. But the point here is that this old cosmology, the Earth is at the center and heaven is up above, right? But the Earth is at the center of all things, and we still hold on to that view in our language when we talk about the sunrise and the sunset. Right? The sun is rising and the sun is setting, whereas that's actually a bit of an optical illusion. Modern astronomers will tell you, since the time of Copernicus, that actually that's not how it works. The Earth is going around the sun, and it's not that the sun is rising, it's that the Earth is spinning. From our vantage point, it's a sunrise and a sunset. But truly, the sun is not moving, we're moving. It's at the fixed center and we're right. But in here we have a geocentric cosmology. It's connected with this man by the name of Ptolemy, who is an Egyptian astronomer. This is the church's cosmology. Historically, they adapted this. There's another cosmology out there, which is the modern one, that the earth is in fact revolving around the sun. But this is the one that the church holds on to and is the one that Aristotle held to. So a geocentric cosmology. But come his day, that is Descartes' day and Donne's day, this man by the name of Galileo has come along, who you've probably heard of as well. And Galileo, with his telescope, looked up into the heavens and saw with a device that no one had ever had before, that there were planets that weren't revolving around the Earth at all. There were moons revolving around Jupiter. It had 4 moons, and they were going around Jupiter. So they weren't going around the Earth, they were going around here. So it broke the whole, and then that led to other thoughts. What does this mean then? Because connected with this whole cosmology is all sorts of other things. There are 7 planets here. The 7 liberal arts are connected with the 7 planets. So is the musical scale. And the 7 orders of the angels. It's all wedded together. In the liberal arts tradition, astronomy is connected with mathematics and is connected with astronomy and is connected with logic, and it's connected with all manner of things. So the whole intellectual tradition is woven together. So if you change the astronomy, it throws everything out of whack. And Donne will reflect that in a poem, or a little segment of a poem he writes called The First Anniversary. And I'm coming to Descartes now, but you'll see what he's talking about, Donne is talking about, with the new philosophy. I'll come to his, let me say, with Descartes. Descartes, in response to Galileo, I think, says, there were things I used to be certain of, and as certain could be. I looked up at the heavens and I thought I knew that they were there and they were as I had been taught, but along comes Galileo and he demonstrates that they aren't the way they appear to be. Things are not the way they appear to be. The sun does not rise and set. The earth is going around the moon. So, what do I do as an intellectual? Like, my whole world is brought into chaos. So he proposes his method of doubt in order to get certainty, because everything is now uncertain. What before it was all certain, now it's uncertain. And he proposes what he calls the method of doubt. And the beginning of skepticism into the mind of the West. That ancient school of philosophy is reintroduced by Descartes. And the method of doubt works like this. He says, how can I be certain of anything? Here's how it's going to be. I will doubt everything that I can't prove with absolute 100% certainty. And what does that mean? I'm going to doubt the things I can see in front of my face. I'm going to doubt that the heavens are the way I've been taught. That actually everything. And I'm going to doubt everything that I cannot hold on to with absolute certainty. So, and that radical system of doubt goes all the way down to the point of, what can I not doubt? Well, I can't doubt that I'm doubting. I know I'm doubting. I don't doubt that I'm doubting, and if I'm doubting, I'm thinking, and if I'm thinking, then I exist. And then the famous phrase, if I'm thinking, therefore I am. So cogito ergo sum. But it's the method of doubt, and the famous lines of Descartes, in Latin, of course, because he's writing it for others, sometimes just called the cogito. I think, therefore I am. But that's from the method of doubt. But he's doubting everything, and unless he can prove it with certainty. And then he's going to build it on the basis of who he is. And then he says, based on the idea that I know that I am, I also have an idea of a greater being than myself, and he establishes God's existence on the basis of that. But it's predicated on doubt, not faith. This is key. But this isn't a philosophy class, and I'm not going to go further on that. But let me look at what Donne says here about, and I think he is actually entirely reflecting on Descartes. And new philosophy calls all in doubt. The element of fire is quite put out. So that I'll come to the cosmology in a sec. The sun is lost, and the earth, and no man's wit can well direct him where to look for it. And freely men confess that this world's spent, when in the planets and the firmament they seek so many new. They see that this is crumbled out again to his atomies. Everything's broken down into little minute parts called atoms. 'Tis all in pieces, all coherence gone, all just supply and all relation. Prince, subject, father, son are things forgot. Those relationships as well. The whole ancient world was rooted in we saw this with in the Aeneid, the piety of relations of fathers to son. You name they do it in Asian cultures to this day, but not in Western cultures. We name ourselves after our father. In Jewish, Jesus is Jesus bar Joseph, the son of Joseph, right? And in Asian cultures, you ask somebody's name, they'll give you their surname because that's who they are. They identify themselves with their family. It's not that they don't have an individual identity, but this is more important to them. That would be the historic understanding. This is who I am. Who am I? I'm Scott, son of Alex, son of whatever, right? And you give the whole your lineage. But this destroys all relations. The method of doubt. He notes the implication of it. Prince, subject, father, son are things forgot. For every man alone thinks that he hath got to be a phoenix that rises from the ashes and begins again from nothing. And that then can be none of that kind of which he is, but he. This is the world's condition now, and now she that should all parts to reunion bow, she that had all magnetic force alone to draw and fasten sundered parts in one. I'm going to skip over the rest of that. It's a great meditation, but it goes on and on and on. It's several hundred lines. It'll take the whole class and more to deal with that poem, but just that sense of how everything's been broken apart by the method of doubt. And modern science is predicated on that, and that's why there's the trial and error. You have to observe it with your own eyes, and then it can be verified by other people. That's the method. The method of certainty is predicated on the method of doubt. And you can't trust your eyes, you can't trust what people have said before you, and you can't even trust relations between people. It's a serious problem. And Donne is living in the light of that. Now, how does he respond to that? He holds everything together in his system, even things that appear contrary and opposite. He doesn't discard any of them. So he'll have the old way of looking at things and he'll have the new one, but he's on the cusp of a new era and he reflects both. He doesn't reject one. He's not a traditionalist and say the new philosophy is garbage. I'm not going to listen to any of it. He thinks I can't deny that there's something here because the cosmology is correct. But if the cosmology is right, then we have to rethink mathematics. And we have to rethink geometry, which they do, by the way, both of those. And we need to rethink literally everything. Everything needs to be rethought, and it is in this day, or in the days that follow. But for Donne, the biggest problem is relationships. They've been fractured. How do we relate to one another? And the problem is, he says, every man thinks that he's got to be a phoenix. There's no creature like me because phoenixes are one, right? They die, they go down the ashes, and then they rise up again. But there's only one phoenix ever. Well, everyone's like a phoenix. A question or comment?
Well, I was just wondering if it all stemmed from it, because it was a similar thing in the Greek, wasn't it? In the Greek philosophy, like in Homer, in the Odyssey, they doubted it, that you could show up in front of their face.
Yes. So they in the Greek tradition, there was a profound skepticism about the way you can't trust things on the basis of appearances.
Like his wife in the end, right?
Right, and this was a sign of his, as I said at the time, a sign of his wisdom is that he was not willing to just take things at face value. He wanted test, investigate. And to some degree, the philosophical tradition of the Greeks was based on that. But note that in Plato and Aristotle and all the others, they thought that there was a truth that was there and you could know it. It wasn't just that you can't trust anything. They didn't go around doubting everything. They did it as a way of checking and verifying, but there was a truth to be known.
So this is different.
This is very different. Because now it will be a collective. The only way objectivity takes forward, going forward, is by the scientific community. So the scientific community and its methodology of testing. The motto of the Royal Society, 1688, the beginning of modern science. Its motto is nullius in verba, which means take on no one's word. You have to test for yourself. Take no one's word for it. Nullius in verba. We're not going to trust words anymore. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. Are we the people of the book? Modern science is to some degree, its guns are aimed against that, because we're not going to take it on anyone's word. We're going to test it. Now, the problem with it, as will develop over time, so are we to take the scientist's word on what science is? Do the philosophers determine what science is? Because there is that sort of problem that arises, or like, so okay, we take nobody's word on it, but that includes the science. So now you want to establish that it's science that climate change is happening. Why should I take your word at it? It comes back to bite you, right? On whose authority will you determine that? You have to prove it then. Well, however many scientists have agreed that this is the case. That doesn't matter. That's a poor form of argument. That's not a scientific argument, actually. It's actually a bad philosophical argument even. It's certainly not a scientific basis. But at any rate, my point, I don't mean to go after that sort of contemporary examples, but this is the age that we live in. And so it's a profound shift, and Donne is on the cusp of it, and he reflects it well in his poetry. So with that, let me come to, and I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to skip over the canonization, and I'm going to read a valediction forbidding mourning. I think. Is it there? I thought it was there. There it is. I'm just going to read the whole of the poem, and I will preface it by saying it's about cosmology, but not only about cosmology, it's about, well, the title will announce it. You know what a valediction is?
Is it the top?
No. What's a valedictorian?
Well, that's what I was saying. Aren't they the top of the class?
Often, but that's got nothing to do with it.
Oh.
That has nothing to do with the word.
Highest grade.
The highest grade often is the valedictorian, but that's got nothing to do with the actual address. A valedictorian is the person that says farewell to the class. It says vale, goodbye, to the class. Dicere is to speak, to say goodbye. So the person who is in a valedictory address, and we have them here at Tyndale at the end of every academic year, there's a valedictorian, and that person will speak on behalf of the graduating class to the graduating class saying goodbye. But of course, hopefully that's not the last time you see one another, but that's the purpose of the valedictory address. So here it's a valediction, but it's forbidding mourning. Now, mourning is something you do when you're bereft of somebody. You mourn when somebody dies. You mourn when you part from somebody you love. There's a sense of loss. Now, the whole of what I just described with this period, there is a profound sense of loss of an old way of looking at things. An identity has been lost in the cosmology. And not just in the cosmology, a belief in words has been undermined by science to some degree. It's a great challenge that we live in the light of to this day. So profound shift, but I'm going to read it. And he's saying it to his, I'll say his wife, but it's not clear. But it's his beloved, and it's a woman at any rate. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say the breath goes now, and some say no, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Two cosmologies. Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less, eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. Okay, so there's all sorts of pictures being used here. Do you know what a pair of compasses are? A pair of compasses. Do you do this in school anymore? In geometry, do you know what? You know what a compass is?
Oh,
Yeah.
is the one where you put the thing down and then...
Correct. Yeah, the thing where you put the thing down. That's technically that's it. A pair of compasses. So one is got a, it's made of metal, and the one foot's got the sharp pointy thing. You stick it down, and the other has the pencil through it, and you draw a circle around it, right? So that's the analogy that he's using, is the pair of compasses. And the pair of compasses represents the two of them then. And of course, as you said, the one sits and it doesn't move, and the other goes around it and draws a circle. Right? So it's a metaphysical conceit. You ever thought of comparing yourself? I mean, most of you aren't married. If you're married, you compare. We're like a pair of compasses. I'm like, really? Thanks, dear. That's so, I feel warm fuzzies there. That's not, a pair of compasses. But the analogy is, I'm going to go away. You can't move. You have to stay put, because that will make me whole. And it will make my circle just. It will make a circle, and a circle is a symbol of perfection. We wear a ring when you get married, right? A little ring. Why? It's a symbol of eternal love. It's a covenant thing. You give rings like we saw in Sir Gawain and so forth. It's a covenant. Well, it's a symbol of a covenant. But it's a round thing. It goes around your finger. It encompasses your finger. Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of stuff. I could go off on all sorts of tangents about rings, but it's a circle, and a circle is a symbol. Where does a circle begin? Where does it end? You can't see. Right? And it's a symbol of infinity, a symbol of perfection, a symbol of their love. And this is all about he has to go and say goodbye, and he says, don't be upset. Why? And what he's going to do here is to compare two types of love. There's an earthly type of love, and there is their sort of love. But it's a very strict dichotomy in this poem. And he will compare two loves to two cosmologies. I'll go back to the cosmology picture here just for a second. Where is it? Is that it? That's it. This is the Ptolemaic cosmology. You'll see it's like a dot with circles around it. So I'll erase what I have here. Two cosmologies, the Ptolemaic and the Copernican. The Ptolemaic is geocentric. the Earth is in the center. The Copernican is heliocentric. Note that we get all these words from the Greeks. Helios, the sun god, geos, geo from geology, geometry, geography. This is the Earth. So this is an Earth-centered cosmos. This is a sun-centered cosmos. And he will say that there are two types of loves associated to these two things. So he's reflecting not just on two ways of looking, but he's saying that one is superior to the other. The whole poem is a metaphysical conceit. It's an intellectual, highly, overly intellectual engagement with different themes and holding them all together. But it's in the poem. Let me talk about the geocentric, the geocentric cosmology of Ptolemy just for a second. You can see that the Earth is in the center, but so the water is on it as well. So there's earth and water on Earth, right? The planet Earth has earth and water on it. It has air above it, and above all that is a ring of fire, they thought. So there's the earth, air, fire, and water. And you can see the fire there. So this is the earth, the water, this is the air represented, and this is the fire in the midst of that. That's what it's supposed to represent. Whether you think it's a very good depiction is another question, but that's what's being depicted. And above all that are other planets, and the other planets, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and then surrounding all those are the spheres of the firmament. So there's the 8th sphere, the 9th sphere, and the 10th sphere, and above all of those spheres is the Caelum Imperium Habitaculum Dei et Omnium Electorum, which is the empire of heaven, or the kingdom of heaven, the habitation of God and all the elect. So on the outside sphere of this cosmos is heaven, where God and his elect, the church, resides. On the outside, now this cosmology is the one that C.S. Lewis uses in Narnia. He's as a medievalist, he's suggesting, because remember Aslan, have you read Narnia? Most. Aslan says, come on children, further up and further in. Thank you. It's okay. Further up and further in. Now, the further up is sort of evident, like you look up into the sky and so forth, but what's with the further in? That doesn't make sense per se, like on my reading of this, except you have to think about it this way. Their understanding of heaven is this is a place that no sinner dare enter. It's like a great city, and sinners are outside the wall of the city. We dare not enter into that city. So up there, we are on the outside, and God is on the inside. He is the great reality, and we have a lesser reality. If you think even in biblical terms, everything that all flesh is like grass, and it fades away. Everything on this earth changes, it disappears. It's there and then it's gone. But God does not change. And those, his beloved who are with him, they are in eternal state, and they have a reality to them that is an unchanging reality. It's a perfect. And we are not in that. So the real thing is up there. It's not down here. Modern science suggests that this is the real world, and it's the only thing. And it's predicated on doubt. You see what I'm saying? What a shift this is, and how much importance this is. But this is the inside, and we're on the outside, even though we're at the center. And this is a funny old thing, because you would think that it was the other way around, that they were so earthly in their views. Actually, they were heavenly in their views, and we were excluded from heaven by virtue of being sinners. And these spheres revolved in perfect concentric circles, and they were moved by, and I can't draw on the board here, I'll draw here so I don't get into serious trouble. These spheres, of which there were 8, moved in different directions, and when they moved and they revolved, they made a music, a celestial music, a divine music, the music of the spheres. It's in some hymns. It's inaudible to us. Why can we not hear the music? Because we're sinners. But it's the perfection of, there's a perfect harmony to which all our earthly harmonies correspond. The reason we hear harmony in our music is because there's a celestial music. And the reason it is beautiful, it's mathematically precise, by the way. Mathematics and music are very closely allied. You can exactly, if somebody is off tone a little bit, some people can hear it immediately. Not quite on. How can you do that? Because there's a mathematical precision to the note. There's a connection between earth and heaven. This is how earth and heaven are combined. But in the music of the spheres, which we cannot hear because of the fall, nonetheless, God is ordering all things. And it is through influence. God is influencing the cosmos down. And it's called influence. They use this word influence. So that what is happening on Saturn or Jupiter or Mars or the Sun or Venus, when there's new constellations in the sky, it has an effect on Earth. And they can demonstrate this. For example, the rising of the tides. Why do the tides rise and why do they fall? Do you know why? The moon. Phases of the moon. As the moon waxes to be a full moon, the tides rise. As it wanes, other way down. If you lived out in Atlantic Canada, you would see this. So there's clearly an influence of the moon on the Earth. There's also influences. These are higher influences. They're just not as obvious, but they're still there. So they think that astronomy is an important science. It does help us explain the appearances of things on Earth, and it's indubitable that this is the case. They also note that the lunae, the moon, when the moon is full, people act like lunatics. Crazy. Right? They're under the influence of the moon. And it's always changing. This is what's so crazy about their love. They're hot and then they're cold. I love you today, but that was yesterday. This is lunacy because what real love is unchanging, like God's love. But those under the influence of the moon will always be fickle. So in Romeo and Juliet, when Romeo swears by the moon that he'll love her forever, she says, swear not by the moon, swear rather by the sun. Precisely for that reason. If you swear by the moon, that means that you're going to be unfaithful to me. Because the moon changes all the time. I don't want you. I want your love to be like the sun. It ever blazes, that doesn't change. It's there. Do you note the little symbol for the sun there, by the way? I don't know if you can see that. This is these are the symbols of alchemy that are here. It's, just in case you can't see it, it's this. Does that look familiar based on what I've just said? The compasses? It's a dot with a circle around it. That's the symbol of the sun. This is an overly intellectual, highly elaborate poem reflecting on all manner of knowledge and throwing it all together in an extended metaphysical conceit. Where is the poem we're looking at? I'll kill that, and I'll kill that, and I'll kill that, so I don't, there it is. But it begins, the whole poem revolves around the very first stanza, because it begins with a simile. As virtuous men. What's a simile? A comparison using like or as. The whole poem revolves around the first stanza in the same way the compasses revolve around the fixed foot. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go. Why do virtuous men pass mildly away? Why do they pass mildly away? Well, let's look at the contrast. While some of their sad friends do say the breath goes now and some say no, so let's act like virtuous men. They die at peace. Why do they die at peace? Why do virtuous men die peaceably without fear? It's a question. Why?
Because they know the Lord.
Right. They know that their death is not their death. Their death is but a sleep. It's the means to life. In real life, it's life with all the elect and with God. They will enjoy real life, not the thing tainted by sin and death and corruption. It will be eternal life. So, of course, death is not a fearful thing to them because they're virtuous. How do they get virtue? Not by being good men, but by being true men. They be the word vir in Latin meaning a man, a manly man. Well, who's the man who's most manly? It's not Achilles. It's Christ who faced his death. He ran to the cross in some medieval renderings. embraced it fully. He went to his death and suffered, not fearing it. As terrible as it was, because he was cut off from God. Right? He experienced the dereliction of the cross so that we would never have to face that. His death was our means of life. So huge paradoxes in the Christian faith. But as they pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, well, some of their sad friends do say the breath goes now and some say no. So let us melt. So now the analogy is made, or the simile. Sorry, it's here. So as that happens, so it begins with a comparison of people dying and whispering to their souls to go. So two things. Person, soul. Their soul goes. Let us be the same way. Me and you, sweetheart. Let's be the same way. Whisper quietly and let's not be sad. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. Now these are stock phrases in English, metaphors, floods of tears. When somebody's crying, there are floods of tears. When they sigh, it's like tempests if they're very sad. But on his understanding, there's a microcosm-macrocosm relationship. A person has floods of tears because a person is like the whole macrocosm. Donne is, by the way, the author of the famous lines that no man is an island unto himself. That's Donne. And ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. That's John Donne. Because everyone is related to everyone else in Donne's conception. He's fighting against the Cartesian severance of all relationships. He's holding on to them poetically. But let us melt and make no noise. So let's not make a big deal out of it, and let's not make like there's a flood or a hurricane or a tsunami. And he says that we're profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. So there he sees the two of them like having a sacred relationship, like a priest to his vows and so forth, or a priest to the church. That's the sort of relationship. And then he makes this other comparison of how they ought not to do. And here are the two cosmologies being compared. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Well, which one is that? This one, the new one. Everything's moving. Do you feel like you're moving right now? I see everyone seated in the room, but you are. You're moving at great speed around the sun because the earth is. Can you trust your senses? Absolutely not. Not if you know that that's the case, but you do. You assume that you're not moving. But if you think about it, you actually are. Well, what's the consequence of the thought? It's actually quite distressing. I can't trust anything. How do I build up certainty if things are that wrong? Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. Reference to Descartes and reference to this cosmology. But trepidation of the spheres, the old cosmology, though greater far is innocence. Now he's playing on words here as well. Harms, as I said, is the verb nocere, but this is not nocere. This is harmful, this is not harmful. So their love is being compared to the Ptolemaic cosmology, in which the earth doesn't move, and she's not to move. He's not, by the way, saying he prefers the one cosmology to the other. He's just using it as a metaphor. You don't move. He's going to continue that analogy as the poem progresses. And he will further on say that if you do dull sublunary lovers, so sublunary are those who are under the moon, their love, whose soul is sense, it's just a physical thing, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove the thing that elemented it. It's not spiritual, it's simply physical, only physical. They can't stand a parting. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. So it's an intellectual love. It's a perfect Neoplatonic love. Our two souls, then he gets this famous comparison of compasses. But before he does that, our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, yet endure not yet a breach, but an expansion like gold to airy thinness beat. Now, you know what gold is like. because you have gold jewelry to this day. It's a valuable, precious mineral. Why is it valuable and precious? Because it glitters, but also because you can cover things with it. It's very soft and malleable, so you can pound it, and you can pound it. It's so thin that it becomes like it literally as thin can be for a metal. And platinum likewise, and silver likewise. They're called precious metals. They're valuable. But gold in particular can be beat to an area, and it can be stretched then, and it still remains one piece. And that's what he's saying to her. I'm going to go away, but we're going to hold together just like the gold. But gold has one further thing. I said that the sun is symbolized by that on that cosmology, but this also in alchemy represents gold. God knows this. In alchemy, that's the symbol of gold. It's also in the astronomy, that was the symbol of the sun. It's overly intellectual, it's overly clever. I'm not making this stuff up. Neither is he. He's just leaning on different forms of knowledge and welding it together in an interesting poem. Now, if they be two, they are two so, and they in some ways they're not two, they're actually one. They are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. So his final metaphysical conceit is that of the two of them like these compasses. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. But they're still connected. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, so it's there, when you have the two together, they're like that. But when you move to make a circle, then you have to move it out. You spread the compasses, right? And then the circle goes around. And the foot stays still, right? And she moves towards it. And yes, of course, she leans and towards him, but it doesn't move. Stable. Though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. It's about perfect love. It's about cosmology. It's about attitudes towards death. It's about God's love. It's about all those things. It's Donne's metaphysical poetry. It's part of the period, and it's really good stuff. I think it's as rich could be. We'll pick it up next class, and when we talk about his holy sonnets. Please read them beforehand, but we'll look at it. And these are theological meditations, but you're going to find them a little shocking for all that, because again, they use rather unsacred language and comparisons. Okay, I'll see you then.